day. The concept of mass marketability is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you reach a wider audience and you make more money, which is always good. But the main issue with mass marketability is the fact that you have to really reduce the overall complexity of a game so that you can reach that much wider of an audience.
This is not necessarily a bad thing. Some games are indeed a bit too complex, and they are indeed a bit too difficult to play due to overly complex gameplay mechanics. Games like Oblivion here took the cumbersome interface and game mechanics of the earlier Elder Scrolls games and simplified them to the point where you could actually play the bloody game, rather than spend 2 months studying a bloody manual in order to learn how to walk forward and attack. But then you have games like Mass Effect 3, an RPG that is simplified to the point where you have a total of 2 dialogue options, and just about any gameplay other than shooting things is taken out. Gone in this game is any real exploration, and also there is no hacking whatsoever. The big problem with RPGs today is the fact that they are just too bloody easy most of the time. You always have where you are supposed to go and what you are supposed to do spelled out for you. Combat is usually just mindless button mashing, and when you do get hit, regaining health is simplicity itself.
Now there's a company out there known as From Software who decided to dispense with all of that. They made a game that had very challenging gameplay and limited options for healing, and essentially the game spelled absolutely nothing out for you whatsoever. And that game was called Demon's Souls.
Demon's Souls was released in 2009 for the PS3 and won considerable critical and fan acclaim due to the fact that it was extremely difficult. This was a game where you could be killed by even the weakest enemy. There was no regenerative health, and if you just yelled charge and attacked head-on, you died instantly. Demon's Souls was the first RPG in a very long time that actually required you to really think. You had to actually read the bloody manual to figure out some very important gameplay aspects. And when it came down to combat, you had to have quick reflexes and good timing to take down enemies. The game was frustrating, to be certain, but from that frustration came considerable satisfaction in killing that one bloody enemy that killed you 50 times!
Now the main issue with Demon's Souls was the fact that it was a PS3 exclusive. And we all know what happens when games go multi-console. They dumb it down so that even the most casual of gamers can actually play it. Well, thankfully, From Software did not do that. Rather, in 2011, they released Dark Souls, a game that dumbed nothing down and polished all of the precepts seen in Demon's Souls to perfection. So now, let's raise our shield and ready our weapon and enter the world of Dark Souls.
The gameplay for Dark Souls is that of a third-person hack-and-slash game. However, the enemies do most of the hacking and the vast majority of the slashing, because the enemy AI is really quite good. They dodge and counter almost as good as the player, and they are very, very aggressive. Furthermore, some of the more defensive-minded enemies are actually, defensive, like these shield bastards. You have to wait ages for them to finally attack you, and you have to get lucky to actually hit them when the window appears. Now, if you were to play this game like a traditional hack and slasher, you would end up dead in approximately no seconds, because you take a lot of damage each time you get hit. Even if you get hit by a bloody rusted sword, it will take off a tremendous amount of HP. This game does have a lock-on feature, and you must use it all the time, because if you don't, you will be able to only attack the enemy from the front, which is a good way to get killed. You need to target an enemy so that you can circle around and attack from behind. Now, most of what you do in this game is attack enemies and try, in vain, not to die. But this game is actually vastly more complicated than just that, which is why the more complicated aspects of the game will be covered under the difficulty section.
Now the game is ostensibly a JRPG, but unlike with other games in the genre, this is not a game where you have spiky-haired morons angsting about.
The game is more in line with Western RPGs in that it does not use a turn-based combat system, and you do not play as a teenager trying to be the most popular in some club. Rather, you play as an undead warrior that must fight countless, and I do mean countless enemies, in order to somehow save the world. What really makes this game hard is the fact that all of the enemies respawn, and all of the enemies from basic zombies to Dark Knight can kill you easily. Thankfully though, they only respawn when you go to a bonfire. Essentially, bonfires act as the game's checkpoint system. Also, it is here that you can level up, repair weapons, and change out magical spells. And later in the game, fast travel. Also, when you go to a bonfire, you heal and your magic points are refilled and your healing flasks are replenished. Now, being able to level up at a bonfire is a huge step up from Demon Souls, because in that game, the only way to level up was to go to a special NPC that had to be unlocked by killing the first boss in the game. Respawning enemies also allows you to level grind, the only real holdover from its JRPG brethren. Believe me, you are going to want to grind, and grind a lot. You really need to be high level when facing just about anything, and you need to be high level because you need to be able to move fast, because if you can't get your ass moving, you're going to die! Graphically, Dark Souls looks really good. Everything is nicely detailed, and the environments are quite beautiful and very large and open. When playing this game, you the player will feel very small and insignificant when moving through the various environments. You will feel like there is nothing you can do to save the world, but you can't stop, because if you do, more will die.
It's really a testament to the developer's skill that you can feel any emotion at all. In most games, levels are just bland, repetitive corridors that you fight in. Here, when you enter any new area, you will feel at least some feelings of dread, because this game has such high difficulty that just about any new enemy that you meet, you'll most likely die because you don't know how to fight it at all.
All of the enemies are nicely detailed, but the damage modeling could be better, because when you hit an enemy, you can't really lop off any limbs or anything cool like that, and they don't even show progressive damage. But still, they do look good, and it is still very satisfying to kill just about any of them. Now, the weapons and armor also look quite good as well, and the armor in particular has a lot of nice little nuances to it. The sound design is also excellent. When you hit a meaty enemy, you get a satisfying thunk, and when you hit an armored enemy, you hear a metallic clang that shows you just how tough said enemy is going to be. Now, different armors will have different sound effects as well. The chainmail sounds like interlocking rings jangling together, and plate mail sounds like metal scraping together. Now, unless you're in a boss fight, there is no music whatsoever, and this can make the game at least a little bit boring, especially since there are going to be times where you're going to have to spend hours grinding, or you're going to have to spend hours trying to kill one bloody boss. At times like this, you would be best served by putting on some sort of epic metal on. In fact, that's not a bad idea at all. Each boss fight has its own theme, and they are all fairly good, and they set the mood quite well. Here is an example of one. Now, I am reviewing the PC version of the game. Why? Because the Prepare to Die edition, as it's called, comes with 2 new areas and the potential for some awesome mods in the future. For now, we have DS Fix, which forces the screen resolution higher and makes the game run a bit smoother. However, for the sake of this review, I will not be using it. Now, the game will at times drop down to 15 frames per second for absolutely no reason at all. The problem usually fixes itself after a couple of seconds, but sometimes one must minimize and then maximize the game to make it work. At times, the game engine chugs when a particularly graphically impressive event happens. And after its 15 frame rate awesomeness ends, the game does go back to normal. The keyboard controls could be a lot worse. That's not to say they're good by any means. However, the game can be played with said controls. Also, there's one really annoying thing, and that's the fact that the cursor doesn't go away. And if you use mouse and keyboard controls, you have to look at that bloody cursor all the time. How hard would it have been to program the game to get rid of it? Hell, Doom BFG Edition even has this problem. Why is it that these bloody developers get lazier and lazier by the minute?
Now, this game can be successfully played with keyboard and mouse controls. How do I know? Well, Mizio's brother was able to defeat Ornstein and Smo, the two hardest bosses in video game history, with keyboard controls, lag, and on the second try. The lucky bastard. Aw, yeah.
Now, Dark Souls' primary claim to fame is its legendary difficulty. The only problem is the fact that it's not so much difficult as it is classically styled. Today, gamers have been spoiled with regenerative health, extremely dumb enemies, and objective markers every 2 feet. In RPGs, we really have lost the concept of the boss, and instead just have an enemy with slightly more health than other enemies. Furthermore, in RPGs today, you don't really have to work for anything either. You just slaughter enemies with impunity. And when you go out to try and complete a quest, you're usually pretty confident that you will be able to complete it without dying even once.
Now, Dark Souls is not so much hard as it is real. If you are a real adventurer in some sort of fantasy universe, every battle would be life-threatening. Every battle would be a chore to get out of alive. You wouldn't just be going around cutting down swordsman after swordsman and killing dragon after dragon. Every swordsman you fought would be something that was an achievement. Every dragon that you killed would be something that you barely scraped through. And that's really why this game is so good. Everything you do has some weight to it. When you kill a dragon, of which there's a few, you feel like you've actually accomplished something. Hell, there's a dragon that you can fight that all he does is puke at you. And guess what? You still feel accomplished when you kill him after only 2 or 3 tries.
In this game, frustration and satisfaction are inversely proportional. The more times you are killed by a boss, the more frustrated you will become, but once you have persevered and killed said boss, you will feel very, very accomplished, which is something you just don't get these days. Any boss you fight in other RPGs will be somewhat easy, and they will go down in 1 to 5 tries, if that. Here, you will probably die at least 5 times just getting to the boss, and then when you finally reach him, expect to die even more. This level of difficulty makes you think. You have to plan out routes just to get to the boss without dying, and when you finally reach him, you need to come up with strategies to win, and you can't just mash the A button and hope for the best.
Now, since this is a game that is far more complex than just pressing the A or X button, I will talk about a few of the more esoteric aspects of Dark Souls.
In order to level up, you need souls, and you get souls by killing enemies, but souls can also be used as currency, with which you can buy equipment and forge and upgrade weapons. As you level up, you need more and more souls. Also, you are going to need to buy certain items at certain times that cost a great deal of souls as well. And here is what really annoys a lot of people. When you die, you lose all of your souls and you are returned to the last bonfire you rested at.
Now, I know this may seem at least a little frustrating, but there is one thing that makes this somewhat bearable.
You can regain all of your souls by finding your bloodstain, but if you die before you find your bloodstain, then you will lose all of those souls forever. And once this happens, you will most likely cry out in anger and, depending upon how many times this has happened to you, crush your controller in your hands. Now, you can heal in this game by taking a swig from your Estus flask, and depending upon the bonfire, you can hold up to 20 swigs. You can also level up your flask by finding a Firekeeper soul, and each time you level up your flask, you can heal yourself more and more. Bonfires can also be leveled up as well. You can kindle a bonfire by feeding it a humanity. Essentially, a humanity makes you human, which means you can get better loot drops, potentially, and you get slightly higher HP. But in all reality, going around as a human is not necessarily a good idea, because this means you can also be invaded by other players. But we will get into multiplayer a little bit later. Out in the world, you can find some NPC trainers, but they are never easy to actually locate, and usually you have to have some sort of item to actually get to them. And you really have to take great care to not nervously or accidentally kill them. And there will be times when you will need to find a certain item at a certain time. And this is where the wiki and multiplayer comes in.
Now, in my opinion, the multiplayer in Dark Souls is kind of annoying. On the one hand, you can find little messages left by other players, and on the other hand, your game can be invaded and you can be killed by the other human players.
Now, as to the multiplayer, I haven't actually played all that much. In fact, I've not recorded any footage for it. Why? Because it's bloody aggravating, the single worst thing I've ever had to play. Okay, here's the problem. You can be trolled by anybody. It's not really level locked. So you might be level 1, and then somebody invades who's like level 50. You die, and die a lot. It makes the game much more aggravating than it should be. So I'm just going to concentrate on the single player experience. Now, the only multiplayer that I actually engage in is where I liaise with other players of this game and devise strategies in order to take down the various bosses. Now, this ties into the whole idea that, when you think about it, these days we don't really say beat a game anymore. We say complete a game. And that is true. Games today are, in fact, so easy that you don't even have to really try all that hard. You don't have to spend hours just trying to progress from one level to another. You don't have to overcome all odds and finally figure out that one strategy that works. No, you just kill the idiotic enemies in front of you and then just get to the end of the game, never really having to work for it. When you finally beat Dark Souls, you have actually made a significant accomplishment. You've actually killed multitudes of enemies that could kill you in 2 or 3 hits. You've actually slogged through one of the hardest games to be released in recent years. Now, one final thing to note on the multiplayer, it is fortunately optional. You see, with multiplayer, you can potentially summon another player to help with a boss fight. This is rendered pointless by the fact that you can summon AI partners to help you in a boss fight, and they're actually pretty capable, and are probably better than many of the human players out there.
Now, with a game this difficult, you might think that there's going to be no story at all, or it's going to be dreadfully paced. Well, thankfully, neither is the case here, and the story is competently executed.
The story is not that large of a concern in Dark Souls, since the main way you interact with others in the game is through sword slashes. You interact with non-hostile NPCs in a fairly simple manner as well. You either say yes or no. But that's not to say that the story isn't compelling by any means. The story is interesting mainly because you're told next to nothing.
Now, back in the day, the concept of less is more was something that was seen in many movies and games. Essentially, this left events up to the player's imagination and led to an overall richer experience than when you just get a flat statement that something is something.
Like with other aspects of the game, you are forced to use your brain and personal judgment to determine what to do. Furthermore, the backstory is something that you, the player, has to puzzle out on their own through the reading of item descriptions and close examination of every bit of dialogue. Dark Souls does not tell you anything explicitly. It expects you to infer from what it shows you what is actually going on. There is a great deal of lore in Dark Souls, but it's lore that you, the player, have to find. Usually, when you play it for the first time, you'll have absolutely, positively no idea what is going on. Why is this guy attacking you? Who knows? He just is. But as you dig through all the various layers of Dark Souls, you'll find out who this character is, and why he's attacking you, and what caused him to attack you, and usually it's something fairly tragic. This is an excellent style of storytelling that is only really seen in games such as this, and is something that I would definitely like to see a bit more of.
Now, without a doubt, Dark Souls has got to be one of the most original RPGs released in recent years. It forgoes the standard elves and dwarves plot, and gives us something truly unique, something truly dark. Now, what initially turned me off of this game was I thought it was stupidly difficult and cheap. Well, that's not the case. The game simply requires you to use tactics other than just mashing the A or X button. It requires that you actually research the game beforehand. And so if you actually put in effort into this game, you will actually have an enjoyable time. And I cannot recommend Dark Souls enough. And so this is GeneralLotz wishing you good Halo 4 and good Resistance Fall of Man, or whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you this awesome content.